The first question Naomi Osaka got in that press conference was not about her own game. It was not about her serve, not about her ranking, not about the hard courts she has spent her entire life owning. It was about the 21-year-old who had just taken her apart in straight sets. And Osaka did not hesitate. Not for a second. She said, "Alex Eala is a star. Sit with that for a moment. 4 Grand Slam titles. All 4 of them won on hard courts. This surface is her home. This is the ground she built a whole career on." And on Saturday night in Washington, an unseeded 21-year-old from the Philippines walked onto it and beat her 6-4, 6-2. No tiebreak. No third set. No lucky night, where every ball caught the line. 2 sets. And the second one was not close. Then Osaka sat down in front of a room full of reporters and said something bigger than the scoreline. She called Eala incredible. She said it is amazing that this young woman has become someone people can look up to, an inspiration, and that she loves listening to the things Eala says. Players who just lost do not usually talk like that. Players who just lost say the conditions were tricky. They say they will work on it. They do not take the microphone and start building a monument to the person who beat them. So here is the question I want you to hold on to for the next 20 minutes. What did Naomi Osaka actually see out there? Because 17 months ago, almost nobody in professional tennis could have told you who Alex Eala was. At the Miami Open last year, she arrived on a wild card, ranked outside the top 100, a name printed at the bottom of the draw sheet where nobody looks. And Jessica Pegula, who is now the world number 3, has described exactly what that week felt like from the other side. She looked out at a crowd screaming for an unknown Filipina at an American tournament, and she was completely lost. She said she genuinely did not understand where all of these people were coming from. 17 months. That is the entire gap. On one end of it, one of the best players on the planet staring at a crowd she cannot explain, roaring for a player she barely knows. On the other end, a 4-time Grand Slam champion looking into a camera and calling that same player a star. Something happened in between those 2 moments. And it is not the version of the story you have probably been told. To understand it, we have to go back further than Miami. All the way back to a 13-year-old girl getting on a plane by herself, leaving behind a country that had never once produced a champion like her. To understand how big Saturday night was, you have to understand something about the country she comes from. The Philippines has more than 100 million people. It is a nation obsessed with sport. Basketball courts sit in every alley in Manila, and boxing gave the country one of the most beloved athletes of the last 50 years. But tennis? Before Alex Eala, the Philippines had never produced a woman who won a WTA singles title. Not one. In the entire history of the tour. So, when a kid in Manila decides she wants to be a professional tennis player, she is not following a path. There is no path. There is nobody ahead of her to copy, no local hero whose career she can trace, no blueprint sitting on a shelf. She is guessing. At 13 years old, she got on a plane to Mallorca. Think about what that actually means. 13. Not 13 with her family relocating around her. 13 and alone, moving to the Rafa Nadal Academy in Spain, over 7,000 miles from her mother, her father, her brother, her friends, her food, her language, dormitory bed. Training blocks that start before breakfast. Months at a stretch without going home. Birthdays on video calls with a bad connection. Most kids do not survive that. Not because they are not talented. Because homesickness at 13 is a physical thing, and it wins more often than it loses. She stayed. And in 2022, on the same grounds in New York where the US Open is played, she won the girls' singles title. That was the first hard piece of evidence that she was not just a nice story. She was not the plucky kid from the country with no tennis. She was, at that level, the best in the world. Here is what nobody tells you about winning a junior Grand Slam. It means almost nothing. Go and pull up the list of junior champions from the last 20 years. Most of those names never crack the top 100. Some never win a main draw match on tour. The gap between beating the best 16-year-olds on earth and beating grown professional athletes is not a step up. It is a different sport, with the same lines painted on the floor. So, Eala went where every young pro goes. Down. Into the small tournaments. 60 spectators. Prize money that does not cover the flight. Playing on court 7 at a venue nobody is broadcasting, against a 27-year-old old who has been grinding for a decade and desperately needs the ranking points too. Year after year of that. And if you are watching this and you already knew her name, I want you to notice something. You almost certainly did not learn it during those years. Nobody did. You learned it in March of last year, in Miami. She showed up ranked around 140 inches the world, in the main draw only because the tournament handed her a wild card. And over the course of 8 days she beat a Roland Garros champion. Then she beat Iga Swiatek. Then she beat the reigning Australian Open champion. A player ranked 140 inches the world, taking out Grand Slam winners in consecutive matches, at 19 years old. That was when the crowds appeared. Filipino flags in Florida, an entire section of the stadium chanting, the noise that left Eala standing at the baseline wondering who all of these people were and where they had come from. Her run ended in the semi-finals. Eala beat her 7-6 inches a first-set tiebreak, lost the second 5-7, and closed it out 6-3. 3 sets. 2 hours of a 19-year-old refusing to go away against a top 5 player. And I know how this looks from here. This looks like the part of the story where the rocket takes off. If you are already in her corner right now, if you felt something watching that, do me one favor before we keep going, drop the word Miami in the comments. I want to know how many of you were there for the beginning of this. Because what happened next is the part almost nobody is talking about, and I want to see who remembers it accurately. Because Miami was not the launch. Miami was the moment the pressure of an entire nation landed on the shoulders of a 19-year-old, and for the next 13 months, it very nearly broke the whole thing apart. Here is the thing nobody tells you about a breakout run. When it ends, you do not go back to being an underdog. You become a promise. And a promise is something people can hold against you. Before Miami, Eala could lose a first-round match in Prague and nobody would write about it. After Miami, every single match she played was evidence in a trial. Evidence for the case that she was the real thing, or evidence for the case that she was a one-week story that got lucky with a favorable draw. And that second case had a lot of supporters. More than you probably remember. Because that is the oldest pattern in tennis. Every March, a wildcard gets hot for 8 days and the internet decides a legend has arrived. Then May comes, and June, and the name quietly slides back down the rankings and out of the conversation. It happens every single year. It has happened to better prospects than her. So, the question that followed her out of Florida was not a kind one. Was Miami real, or was Miami just one very good week? Now add the part that makes this harder than anything you or I have ever dealt with. She was not answering that question for herself, she was answering it for 100 million people. There was no other Filipina on tour to share the load with. No senior player from her country to absorb the attention. Every time she walked onto a court, she carried a nation that had waited its entire sporting history for someone exactly like her. Every loss was national news in Manila. Every win was a headline. At 19 years old. So, what does a 19-year-old do with that? What is the correct amount of pressure for one person to hold before something inside gives out? Then came Eastbourne. June of last year, on the grass in England, Eala reached the first WTA final of her career. A 250-level event, the smallest rung on the main tour ladder, but a final is a final. One match away. One match from becoming the first Filipina in the history of the sport to win a WTA singles title. The thing nobody from her country had ever done. Sitting right there. She lost. I want you to actually picture the ceremony, because this is the part the highlight packages skip. She is standing on the grass. The champion is holding the trophy. There is a smaller piece of silverware in her hands, the one they give the person who came second. The photographers are pointed the other way, and she is smiling, because you are supposed to smile, and she has to stand there for a full 10 minutes while the celebration happens for somebody else. That is not a bad afternoon. That is a national moment that arrived and then did not happen. And the narrative did what narratives do. It hardened. Great story, they said. Great talent. Cannot close. What happens next is the part I find genuinely difficult to talk about, because it is the least glamorous stretch of her whole career and it is also the most important. She went back down. Not down as in collapsed. Down as in returned to the level where nobody is watching. WTA 125 tournaments. The tier below the main tour. Guadalajara in Mexico. Then Birmingham. This past June. Small venues, small crowds, no American broadcast, no press conference full of reporters. Titles that do not make ESPN and do not go viral and do not get you invited onto talk shows. That is not a comeback montage. That is a job. And I need you to understand how quiet that period was, because it is the reason so many people were shocked on Saturday night. For 13 months after Eastbourne, if you were a casual tennis fan in the United States, Alex Eala essentially disappeared from your feed. Not from tennis, from your feed, from the algorithm, from the discourse. You cannot be a phenomenon twice. The novelty of Miami was spent. The cute underdog headline had been written already. So, the coverage moved on to the next teenager, and Eala was left with the least interesting thing in professional sport, the grind, in front of nobody, with a country still waiting. Which brings me to the question that this entire video actually turns on. If Eastbourne proved she could not finish, and if the 13 months after it were spent winning tournaments that barely register on the tour, then why did Naomi Osaka, a 4-time Grand Slam champion, sit down in Washington last weekend and call this player a star? Not a prospect. Not a nice story. A star. Something had to change. And the honest answer is that from the outside, from where you and I were sitting, nothing appeared to change at all. She did not hire some famous new coach that made headlines. There was no viral technical overhaul, no dramatic reinvention story that the tennis media latched onto. From the outside, it looked like the same player, playing smaller tournaments, slowly running out of the one thing a prodigy cannot get back. Time. So, going into Washington last week, into a draw stacked with seeded players and Grand Slam champions, an unseeded 2-1 year old with one lost final on her record, looked like exactly what she had looked like for 13 months. A wonderful story that had already peaked. And then she won 4 matches in 6 days, and every single assumption I just described turned out to be wrong. Beating 1 seed is an upset. Beating 4 in 6 days is a method. Look at what she actually walked through in Washington. Zheng Qinwen, an Olympic gold medalist. Leylah Fernandez, the defending champion of the tournament, the woman who lifted the trophy there 12 months earlier. Elina Svitolina, ranked number 10 in the world. And then Naomi Osaka, 4-time Grand Slam champion. 4 players. Any one of them beats an unseeded 2-1 year old on most days of the week. And the 3 matches before the semifinal? Straight sets. All of them. She did not drop a single set on her way to the final. That is the number that should stop you. Not the Osaka win. The fact that she never once needed a 3rd set to get there. Luck gives you one afternoon. Luck does not give you 3 routine wins over seeded professionals inside a week. What you are looking at is not a hot streak. It is a repeatable process, and it took me a long time to see what the process actually was. So let me take you inside the Osaka match, point by point, because it is all in there. Osaka takes the opening game. Normal. Then Eala breaks early and moves ahead 2-1. Osaka responds, wins 3 of the next 4 games, and suddenly leads 4-3 with the set on her racket. This is the moment the story is supposed to end. Grand Slam champion finds her level, young player fades. We all go home and say she showed great fight. Eala wins the next 3 games. Set, 6-4. Second set, she races out to 2-0. Then she serves for the match at 5-2, gets to 40-0, and even with Osaka pushing back on that final game, she closes it out. 6-2. Now, here is the part that changed how I see this player entirely. Go and look at the serve numbers from that match. Eala won 71% of the points behind her first serve. She won roughly 79% behind her second serve. And across the entire match, under that pressure, in a semi-final, against a 4-time major champion, she hit exactly 1 double fault. 1. Then look at the other side of the net. Osaka, whose serve is one of the most feared weapons the women's game has produced this century, won just 59% of the points on her own delivery. Eala broke her 4 times out of 12 chances. Sit with that inversion for a second. The famous power server got broken 4 times. The 2-1 year old who is not known for power at all barely lost a point behind her second serve. And this is where the assumption breaks. Because if you watched that match and thought Eala won because she out-hit Naomi Osaka, you have it completely backwards. She never tried to out-hit her. Not once. Think about a fighter stepping in against someone 20 pounds heavier with a genuine knockout punch. The losing strategy is to trade. The winning strategy is to never, ever be standing where that punch is designed to land. You do not need to be stronger. You need to make strength useless. That is what happened on Saturday. Osaka finished the match with 18 unforced errors. Eala had 10. Eala did not overpower her. She made Osaka's own power the most dangerous thing on the court, for Osaka. Every ball came back at an awkward height, at an awkward depth, in an awkward rhythm, until the biggest weapon in the building turned into a liability. That is not talent. Talent is what she had in Miami. This is craft. This is a player who spent 13 months in small tournaments learning how to construct a point instead of just winning one. And if that landed for you, if that reframed the match the way it reframed it for me, I want to hear it. Tell me in the comments whether you think Eala beat Osaka, or whether Osaka beat herself. Because I have gone back and forth on it, and the honest answer is that the best players in the world make the other person beat themselves. That is the whole job. But I want to know where you land, because the split on this one is going to be genuinely interesting. Now back to the thing that started this whole video. Because when you understand that Eala won that match tactically rather than physically, Naomi Osaka's press conference stops being a nice gesture from a gracious loser. Osaka is one of the smartest ball strikers of her generation. She stood across the net for 1 hour and change and felt exactly what was being done to her. She felt someone taking her best asset and turning it into her biggest problem. And she knew, standing there, that it was not an accident. When she said Eala is a star, that was not kindness. That was a professional assessment from someone who had just been dismantled and understood precisely how. And here is what should genuinely unsettle the rest of the tour. If it is craft, and not a hot week, then it does not go away next month. It compounds. So the real question is whether Washington was one magical week or the first visible proof of something she built in private. And there are numbers that answer that. Numbers from this entire season that nobody put together until this weekend. 6 wins over top 10 players. This season alone. Not across a career. Not since she turned professional. In one season, at 21 years old, from a ranking that started the year outside the top 30. Let that recalibrate the whole story for you. Because a one-hit wonder does not beat 6 top 10 players in a single year. A player who cannot handle pressure does not do that. 6 separate times, on 6 different days, against 6 of the best athletes in her sport, she walked out and won. Miami was not the outlier. Miami, it turns out, was the first data point in a trend that has been building in plain sight while most of us were looking somewhere else. Now put the 2 runs side by side, because this is the evidence that convinced me. Miami. Last year. 19 years old. Ranked around 140 inches the world. She beats Grand Slam champions in consecutive matches, riding pure adrenaline and a crowd that would not stop screaming. And then she loses a 3-set semi-final where she led at points and could not shut the door. Washington. This week. 21 years old. Career high ranking of 28. She beats an Olympic champion, a defending champion, the world number 10 and a 4-time Grand Slam champion, and she does not lose a single set until the final. Same player. Completely different athlete. In Miami, she won because she was inspired. In Washington, she won because she was better. Those are not the same thing, and the difference between them is the entire 13 months everybody wrote off as a disappointment. And the ranking is now moving in a way that is hard to keep up with. Reaching that final alone lifts her to number 24 inches the world. If she wins the title, she goes into the top 20. 28 to 24 to a top 20 player, on the back of 1 week in Washington. She is 1 match away from becoming the first Filipina to win a WTA singles title. In the entire history of professional tennis. 1 match. But I want to give you the piece that I think is the most underrated thing happening in women's tennis right now, and I have not heard a single analyst say it out loud. Alex Eala's crowd has become a competitive weapon. We talk about it like it is decoration. Nice flags, great atmosphere, good for the sport. It is not decoration. For the last 12 months, she has drawn enormous, loud, relentless Filipino crowds to every tournament she has entered, and the important part is where those tournaments are. Not in Manila, in Florida, in Washington, D.C., in the United States, at American tournaments, against American players. Here is Eala, the world number 3, an American, describing Miami. She said she looked around at that crowd and could not comprehend where those people were coming from. She was confused in her own country. At a tournament 20 minutes from where she lives, In a semifinal, she was winning. And looking back on it now, she says it makes complete sense to her. Think about what that means in practice. A player ranked outside the top 25 is generating home court advantage at other people's home tournaments. That is a thing that does not exist in tennis. Top players get partisan crowds in their own countries. Eala gets them everywhere. And it is not a coincidence that Washington ran into her this week. The tournament had bet on her. They put resources and scheduling and sold seats, a stadium that sounded like a soccer match, and the biggest story of the tournament week walking out of their draw. Every other tournament director on the calendar just watched that happen. So think about what the rest of her season now looks like. She goes into the American hard court swing, and then the US Open in New York, a city with a massive Filipino-American community, on the biggest stage in the sport. If Miami got that loud in a semifinal, what does Flushing Meadows sound like when she walks out for a night session? She is not just climbing the rankings, she is arriving with a crowd already built. Eala herself put it plainly after the Osaka match. She looked at that draw before the tournament started, and it was big player after big player after big player. Which is why making the final meant so much to her. 6 top 10 wins. A career-high ranking. 4 seeded players in 6 days. A crowd that follows her across continents. Every single number lines up in the same direction, and it all points at one conclusion. Which brings us all the way back to that press conference. Because when Naomi Osaka talked about Alex Eala, she did not talk about her forehand. She did not talk about her serve, or her movement, or any of the things you would expect a losing player to mention. She talked about something else entirely. And once you notice what it was, the whole story stops being about tennis. Osaka did not compliment her forehand. She did not break down her serve or her return position or the way she absorbs pace. She said Eala is someone people can look up to. She called her an inspiration. She said she loves listening to the things Eala says. And Naomi Osaka, of all the players on that tour, knows exactly what that costs. Osaka has carried a country on her back. She has been the face of a nation at an Olympics in her own home. She has been through what happens when a young woman becomes a symbol before she is finished becoming a person. When she looked at a 21-year-old who had just beaten her and used the word inspiration, she was not handing out a compliment. She was recognizing someone standing at the start of a road she has already walked, and she was saying, out loud, that this one is going to be fine. That is the answer to the question I asked you 20 minutes ago. What did Osaka actually see out there? She saw craft she could feel from the other side of the net. And she saw a successor. Here is where the story gets bigger than one player. Tennis has spent decades trying to open new markets. Alex Eala is a door into a country of more than 100 million people that has never had a tennis hero, and into a Filipino-American community that this sport has barely acknowledged existed. Washington bet on her, and it worked. That is not a feel-good story. That is a business case, and every tournament on the calendar just saw the proof. Which is what makes the last 24 hours so strange. Because that final is not finished. She walked out against Jessica Pegula on Sunday and the sky opened. 3 hours of thunderstorms before they even started. Pegula took the first set 6-4. Eala steadied herself, held twice, moved ahead 2-1 inch the second, and then the lightning came back and drove them off the court. 5 more hours of unplayable weather. They called it. So as I am talking to you right now, the score in that match is 6-4, 1-2. The first WTA title in Philippine history is sitting on a table in Washington, unclaimed, waiting on a weather report. She is a set down with a nation watching, and she has to walk back out and start again cold. I have no idea how that ends. Neither do you. But here is what I keep coming back to. Whatever the scoreboard says when they finally finish, none of what we just talked about changes. The 6 top 10 wins do not unhappen. The 4 seeded players in 6 days do not unhappen. And Naomi Osaka does not take back the word star. A trophy would be the headline. It was never the evidence. So, let me leave you with the question I genuinely cannot answer. Is Alex Eala the best story in women's tennis right now, or is she simply the best player nobody has ranked correctly yet? Tell me below, because I think how you answer that says a lot about what you think happens at the US Open in a few weeks. And that final restarts in a matter of hours. Whatever happens on that court, whether the first Filipina champion in the history of this sport is crowned in the rain in Washington or has to go and find it somewhere else, I am covering it. Point by point. So if you want to know how this ends, and what it means when it does. Come with me. Subscribe. Because this story is not over. And the next chapter starts before most people even wake up.